Hi stars, in this video I'm going to talk to you about aspects of moiety. These are the aspects in astrology that can just go one way, and it's quite an interesting concept. If we haven't met before, my name is Alison. I'm an astrologer in Vancouver, Canada. This is part of my aspect series or playlist, and there is more information about aspects in general on this link here if you are interested and want to know more about aspects. So the idea of moiety is that the size and position of a planet dictates its orb within aspects. So what this means is that each planet will have a different orb that pertains to itself, rather than taking a regular aspect and say, oh, a conjunction's 8 degrees, that's the orb, regardless of what the planets are. So when you're looking at aspects of moiety, you are considering the size and the position of the planet in relationship to the Earth. So it's actually quite a different way of looking at aspects, and it's certainly a way to fine-tune your astrological readings. Especially if you work with clients, it can add a certain interest to the flow within a chart, because what this basically means is that some aspects may be going one way. So typically, say you had the Sun conjunct Mars, and you would then say, oh, the Sun conjuncts Mars, Mars conjuncts the Sun. But with aspects of moiety, you have the potential to just have a one-way aspect where the Sun just conjuncts Mars and Mars does not conjunct or conjoin the Sun. So let's get started. So let's have a look at the aspects of moiety. So the definition for moiety is that moiete is a French word which I may not be saying correctly, derived from the Latin medietas, meaning medium measure, mean value, or half. And moiety in traditional astrology defines the half measure of any planet's orb. This dimension specifies the distance that any planet's orb of influence extends on either side of the planet. So what we are saying, that planets, by their position and size, will have an influence, and this is what we're talking about. So for example, with the Sun's moiety, the Sun's influence extends around 30 degrees on the zodiac, which is the diameter, and that is about 15 degrees on either side of the center. So this 15 degrees, which is the radius, is the moiety of the Sun's influence, which is the radius. And we do know that when you have planets coming under the Sun's beams, they come to be generally 17 degrees, but 15 degrees depending on the actual declination of the planet as well. But this is where these numbers are coming from. Also, you can't see the new moon until it is at least 15 degrees away from the Sun. So this is the Sun's influence. So when we're talking about planets with moiety, we are only generally, when I do my astrology work, I only consider the visible planets, and that would be the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These are the planets that you can go outside and look up at the sky and see. They are known as the visible planets. And if you really want to use outer planet moiety, we have suggested the moiety diameter would come in at 4 degrees, and that would give you a radius of 2, which is a much tighter orb for the outer planets, because the influence is less, clearly, because we can't see them and they're miles away. So yes, size does matter. So a planet's size and moiety, this is the whole point. So in general, the size of the planet is the basis for the moiety orbs. So the Sun is the largest planet that we consider in astrology, then the Moon. Saturn and Jupiter are pretty big as well. They are, of course, known as the gas giants, so they have a larger moiety, as you'll see in a moment. Mars is slightly superior to the Earth, so it does have a slightly larger moiety. And then Mercury and Venus are planets with the smallest orb, although I believe Venus is actually slightly larger than Mars. But because they are inferior to the Earth, they are considered lesser. Now, the traditional moieties of the planets are as follows. The Sun has 15 degrees, the Moon has 12 degrees, Mercury is 7, Venus is 7, Mars is 8, Jupiter is 9, and Saturn is 9. These are traditional moiety orbs.
So let's just have a look at our moiety diagram. What we have there is that the Sun, with a moiety of 15 degrees, has a much wider influence along the zodiac, whereas little old Mercury has a moiety of 7 degrees, which is far less. It's even less than half of what the Sun's is. So what we actually see in this diagram is that the Sun is aspecting Mercury. The Sun, for instance, would be, say, conjoined Mercury, but Mercury does not aspect the Sun because the Sun is not in Mercury's moiety. The Sun is not in the red circle. Mercury is in the yellow circle, which is the Sun's influence, but the Sun is not in the red circle, which is Mercury's influence. So this clearly means that the Sun has an aspect to Mercury, but Mercury does not have an aspect to the Sun. So this then creates what we would call a one-way aspect. And clearly it's also expressed as that the Sun will see Mercury, but Mercury does not see the Sun. So this is the whole point of these moiety aspects. Now, it wouldn't just occur for a conjunction, it can also be squares, trines, and what have you. But the point being that one planet may aspect the second planet, but the second planet does not aspect the first planet. These really are subtleties in astrological interpretations. So when you are actually going to be interpreting some moiety aspects, the planet with the greater orb of moiety will always aspect the lesser planet if the lesser planet is not in orb. This is a one-way aspect. So in our previous diagram, if Mercury was closer to the Sun and the Sun then was in the red influence of Mercury, Mercury would then be aspecting the Sun. But this is exactly what moiety is about, that it's a one-way aspect where the Sun is aspecting Mercury, but Mercury is not aspecting the Sun. So for moiety interpretations, the planet with the greater orb will always influence or bring pressure to the planet with the smaller orb, unless they are both in orb of each other. Now, there is another way of working with moiety rather than just taking the standard traditional orbs of the planets where the Sun is 15 and Mercury's 7 and so on. And this was brought up by an astrologer called Claude Dario, he took a different approach in which the two planetary orbs were added together and then halved to find a mean orb between the two planets. Now, this is slightly different, and this is generally known as the moiety technique. And in the moiety technique, moiety in this instance refers to the result when the sum of two planetary orbs is divided by 2 to find the midpoint. So you would take the two moiety degree orbs of two planets, add them together, and then divide them by 2. So this is slightly different. So here we are actually finding the midpoint of influence. And in an example that we've been working with, for the Sun and Mercury, the moiety technique midpoint result will be 11 degrees. Because what we're doing is we're saying we've got 15 degrees for the Sun and we've got 7 degrees for Mercury. And you add the two together and you get 22. You then divide that by 2 to get the average mean distance, i.e. the midpoint of the orb, and it would end up being 11 degrees. So this is slightly different. So there are two ways of dealing with moiety in this way.
So there was quite a bit of information there. It's another way of looking at aspects. It's a way to consider that we don't, although when you start to learn astrology, you knew some basic rules that conjunctions are 8 degrees, oppositions are 8 degrees, and so on. When you get a little further into understanding aspects, when you take the idea of moiety into consideration, you can see that there is a different flow within the chart, because larger planets and closer planets and bigger planets will actually flow their energy towards the other planets, and they will tend to dominate. This is because they are generally bigger anyway. It's an interesting way to look at aspects, and it's certainly something that you as an experienced astrologer need to consider. So I'd just like to hear from you. Do you have any aspects that stand alone separately, but once you put the moiety on, you find you've actually got a one-way aspect where the energy is only flowing one way in the aspect? If you found this content valuable, please do consider subscribing, like the video and share it with anyone who would be interested. It helps me and it certainly helps YouTube. I'm Alison Price. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.